What fractional CFOs can do is you can purchase a portion of them. So, there's all kinds of different ways to do it. Sometimes I have clients that I spend 20 hours a month with. Sometimes it's 5 hours a month. Sometimes it's more than that. And so you're getting that senior level strategic advice, but you're not paying the outrageous or the very high salary.
Hello there. Welcome back to the My Future Business Show. It is wonderful to be in front of you again. I love being the host of this show because I get the opportunity to not only learn from amazing people doing great things in their business, but also to share that knowledge with you. Now, on today's show, I have the pleasure of welcoming the owner of Impact CFO, Fractional CFO, Mr. Lowell Mora. Welcome to the show, Lowell.
Hello, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure to have you here. Now, today, you and I are going to be talking about what it is to be a fractional CFO, what the functions of a fractional CFO are, and how they can help you with senior level strategic financial support. Now, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, I think you crystallized it all really, really well. It's a little more complicated like that than that, but there's actually quite a few different variations of fractional CFO work. And what I do based on my career, which has spanned 35 years and 25 years as a sitting CFO with primarily family-owned businesses in manufacturing, industrial products, industrial equipment, maintenance and service type work. So I come at it I like to help with the really high-level strategic structuring of the business, the advice to a CEO, a family-owned business or a privately owned business. That CEO seat is typically the loneliest seat, and in particular in a family-owned business.
Absolutely.
I always joked around. I come home and I sit down at dinner, and nobody really knows or cares what I do. But when you're sitting at Thanksgiving dinner or Sunday dinner, and all your siblings and family members also own the business, it's a little hard.
Different. So, well, look, I'd love to. We are definitely, absolutely going to be talking about all of these things and really unpack what a fractional CFO is for those who don't know, because there's certainly a lot involved. And on your comment, there are a lot of people that absolutely will care about what a fractional CFO is by the end of this call, I'm for sure and certain. Now, so where are you calling in from today?
So I live in the Chicago area in the U.S. and I've lived here for pretty much my whole life. I'm Midwesterner.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of my wife jokes with me all the time now that the safest place to be is with all the natural disasters and everything is in the Great Lakes area in the Midwest. And then we had a huge swath of tornadoes just the other day. You can't stay away from it. So
I know that it's one of the biggest cities in America, isn't it, Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, we used to be second. They used to call us the second city, and now we're third or fourth. So it's New York, LA, and then I think we might be still a neck length ahead of Houston. But it is a very big city. So
I remember going from state to state last time I was in America, and I find that the cultural differences, they're quite stark, aren't they? What can you tell us a little bit about Chicago and the culture there?
Yeah, Chicago's a very, very big city. But if you compare it to the East Coast, and I love going to the East Coast, people are really very, very friendly in Chicago.
Yeah.
It's it's not maybe like being in Nebraska or one of those places where it's really farmland and all that. But you go an hour and a half outside of Chicago, and it's farmland, and you really can get far out.
Yeah.
I kind of explain it as, if I'm downtown Chicago and I live out in the suburbs, and I have for a long time, but I lived in the city. If you're in Chicago and you see somebody wandering around and doesn't know where they're going, I'll walk up and say, "Hey, what are you looking for?" and help them get where they want. In New York, you'd be lucky if they punched you in the face, right? So, again, people on the East Coast would admit that it's a little bit different. And then, the West. I mean, it's like having a bunch of different cultures within the country, because the West Coast is very different. Texas is very different.
Oh yeah.
The South is different. So, but I think in the end, it's all just people and reaching out and trying to be really kind to people. So
absolutely, I think you've hit the heartstring right there, Lowell. That's for sure and certain. Now I know that you've got the Willis Tower there. What sticks out for you? What's a landmark that you enjoy seeing?
Yeah, You know what's really funny is they call it the Willis Tower now, but it used to be the Sears Tower.
Sears
So
Tower. Yep.
Sears Roebuck, and so all of us old Chicagoans who've been here a long time say no, it's the Sears Tower. You know, for me, my biggest landmark is I'm a huge Chicago sports fan. So for me, the place you have to go is Wrigley Field.
Yep.
That's where the Chicago Cubs play. It's probably the second oldest stadium in the country. The one in Boston, Fenway Park, where the Red Sox play, is probably a bit older, but it's kind of like a throwback. I know they've done all kinds of things to gentrify the neighborhood, and you can get all kinds of fancy stuff around there. But you will walk into the park, and it's still a brick old building.
I love
So
it.
it's a great place. I mean, there's a million things you can do. You know, it's amazing, and I think you think about this. So I don't know if you've been in Chicago, but we have this area called Millennium Park, which they have that big. It's a big object called the bean, and you can
Yep.
take pictures with it and all that. And I feel like that was opened yesterday, and I just read that it's been there for 20 years.
Yeah.
So to
Wow.
me, it's Millennium Park is brand new and the bean is new, but it's been there for 20 years.
It's
So
crazy, isn't it? How time flies, isn't it?
yeah, and we have, you know, Chicago's kind of one of those cities that you could spend a month here and not run out of things to do.
I love that. I love
And
that.
it's a great city, great restaurants,
Yep.
great cultural, great, you know, very, like a lot of the cities in the U.S., you know, there's an immense amount of people from all over the world. You know, it's one of my favorite stats. I'll tell you, just favorite facts is, you're going to know the answer, but did you know what the second largest Polish population in the world? What city second largest Polish population in the
I reckon
world?
it's going to be Chicago, isn't it?
It's Chicago, and number one is Warsaw. So it's just amazing what we have here, and the culture we have. So
Yeah, well, look, that's a real credit to the people that live there. You've got to live life with open arms, that's for sure and certain. You touched on restaurants earlier. Do you have a particular place you like going and type of foods?
my favorite food is I really like Mexican food. So you can get some really, really great, authentic Mexican food
Love it.
in Chicago. There's a restaurant. It's very, very hard to get into in the city. Again, this one's probably been around for 30 years now, but it's called the Frontera Grill.
Hmm.
Um, it's downtown, and it's more authentic than a lot of the stuff that you'll get. You know, I'm a little bit picky about it. I In my past, I worked quite a bit in Mexico, and I actually lived in Mexico for a couple of years in the 90s. And I came back. I met my wife right after I came back, and like my wife and my family are like the most, you know, American people you ever get. And when I try to get them to eat the authentic stuff, they're like, "I just want a taco, Dad. I just want a burrito." But this place does a really good blend of having a very high level of cuisine, but
Yep.
coupled with some of the more authentic techniques. So it's really, really good.
That's what you need, isn't it? Now, in the off season, when your teams are not playing, do you get up to anything else? Do you have any hobbies, or what's your thing?
You know, I have three daughters who are now 21, 19, and 14.
They grow up
Um,
quick.
so I spend a lot of time chasing them around. You know, in Chicago, I don't know if you've ever been here, but we get kind of cold in the winter, so we kind of barricade in and do that. But you know, it's a place to go and do different things. So I spend a lot of my time. I have over the last 4 or 5 years. My middle daughter, who's just finished her freshman year at college,
Yep.
is a very accomplished cheerleader, and
Oh,
so she was a state champion in cheerleading in her high school, and now she cheers in college at University of Miami in Florida. So I chase them around a bit. It's a good excuse for me to go and
get
see
involved.
some games and visit the kids. And then
Love it.
my older daughter's in Colorado at university. So I
Busy.
chase them around a bit, and you know, I just we love dogs. We have two dogs. We walk them a bit, you know, in our suburban area, and yeah, it's mostly just spent time with the kids and
You know
visiting
what?
those kinds of
I
things.
tell you what. As soon as you started talking about dogs, I thought, here we go. I'm a Rottweiler fan. I've got three large dogs,
Oh yeah,
and they're all purebred, and I just love them. I adore them. They're a place. They're like a secret sanctuary away from the world, aren't they? How do you feel when you get around your dogs? They make you feel good.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we have two dogs. We
Yep.
have an older 13-year-old. She's a Labradoodle, and
Oh,
she is the most gentle,
yeah.
kind, loving creature. And then now we kind of got her when we thought we wanted to have that well-bred dog. And
Yep.
then we have a 9-year-old who's an American Eskimo, and we adopted him because he wasn't abused or anything, but he needed to be adopted.
Mm.
He's a very tough dog. So that's my wife's dog, and then the Labradoodle is my dog, and she follows me around. And sometimes we have a home in Michigan, which is about 4 hours from where we live, and sometimes I'll just go up there alone and take my one dog, and it's just
This is
you
you.
can do your work from anywhere, and I work there, and I just sit with my dog, and it's just very relaxing. So
I love it.
dogs are the best creatures ever because they're just forgiving, and they love you no matter what you've done. So
Yes, yes, thank you. I love it. And this is what I think is unique about the My Future Business Show. Yeah, we're talking about business. We're going to shift gears in a moment and do that, but we get some context about your life, and I think that's a really, really cool part of the show. So thank you very much for
yeah, no,
sharing.
my
Now,
pleasure.
now, prior to growing up and doing the things that you're doing in Chicago, you mentioned that you lived elsewhere. Where was that?
Where I lived elsewhere.
Yeah, as a child.
Yeah. Oh no, I lived as a child. I grew up in Chicago.
Oh,
In the mid '90s, after I started my career, I
yep.
was working for a company in Chicago, and we opened a business in Mexico. And they said I was like 25 years old. It was a huge opportunity at an early point in my career. I actually worked for it was a rail car leasing company called GATX Corporation, and they said, "Hey Lowell, we're starting this business down there. Do you want to be involved in the full analysis of us buying this business, getting involved in it, and then you can go down there for a couple of years and be the head of finance there?" And I said, at the time I wasn't married, and
Right.
I said, "Hell, heck yeah, where do I sign up? It's kind of an adventure."
Yep.
And I did speak. I studied Everybody in the U.S. studies Spanish, right?
Of
Most of us
course.
study Spanish.
Yep.
So I had studied quite a bit in high school and college. And I had an acumen for it, and I lived down there for a couple of years. So very, very different. Again, the culture is very, very different.
Hmm.
I've spent a great part of my career working fully for European companies and then in the North American operations. So I've got a lot of exposure to Canada and Mexico. Canada and the U.S. are similar, although Canadians don't want to be called Americans. Mexico is a very, very different. It's a different animal. I always said if you fight it, you're not going to be successful there,
Yep.
and you have to embrace the culture. So I still have some of the fondest memories of living there and working down there. So
Well, it's
um,
interesting because we talked about the, I guess, the cultural variation between cities, but between different countries, locations that you've worked in, is the shift in cultures different, even though the functional CFO works is primarily the same?
yeah, it's very, very different. So I mentioned being responsible for U.S., Canada, and Mexico, but I've worked for three different European-owned companies that was headquartered in Europe. I worked for the Swedes, I worked
Yep.
for the Dutch, and I worked for the Germans. I've also dabbled with the Danes and the Swiss. It's very interesting because accounting or finance is viewed very differently in different places.
Yep.
For instance, the Germans, I love working for the Germans. I worked for a German company for 4 years, family owned business. And with the Germans, quite a bit of everything is form over substance. So that's very difficult for us Americans, right? To the Germans, they'd say, "Where's your organogram and where's your organization chart? And did you fill the boxes out right and do all this right?" And we're saying, well, that's not, we follow a process here, but we're not as worried about filling everything out right. We're more worried about growing the business and really doing the right things for the customer. And neither one's right or wrong.
Yeah.
Um, the Germans are very kind people. I found that working for the Swedes, I really enjoyed working for the Swedes. But as you know, we in the U.S. can be very um, direct and sometimes perceived as overbearing. So when you work in an international company, you have to realize what the perception is.
Yeah.
And I love working for the Swedes because it's a very, as opposed to us over here, it's a very consensus based culture. Um, and I can tell you more than a couple times I was sitting with one of the highest mucky mucks over there in Sweden, and he said, "Lowell, I heard your opinion. I understand it, but we're going to talk about that in 6 months." And
Oh.
and they're very direct because um, all the cultures are different, and a lot of Americans, and I don't know who it is for you. I'm guessing you've traveled the world. My parents never left the United States. My parents
Mm.
maybe went on a holiday to a beach in Mexico, but they didn't understand the cultures and all that. And most of my traveling has been related to my employment and my work, and then you get a little fun in there. But understanding what the rest of the world is like, and really what the perception of your country is and your people from other views is very, very important,
Yeah,
right?
it's very
I don't
different,
think
isn't it?
I don't think too many people are enthralled with the Americans right now, but let's not get into that.
No,
So,
that's another story for another time. That's for sure and
yeah,
certain. Now, I know that you've headed up the human resources departments and IT groups. Tell us a little bit about how that's played a part in your life.
yeah. So, when you work for what I would call small to mid-sized businesses, so most of the businesses I've worked for have been in US dollars, 50 to $250 million in sales. While that's a big company, it's not a giant company. Um, and it's not huge. So you have to wear a lot of hats, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
most of the companies I've been in, they say, okay, Lowell, it depends where it is. They say, Lowell, okay, you're going to be the head of finance, the CFO, but in our company, we don't have a VP of HR that reports into you, and IT, you've got to manage that. So what you really learn is how to be more of a general manager, and figuring out and understanding what aspects and pieces of that you need to know. Right? There's no way I could ever understand everything that's involved in IT. Right? It's very complicated, very technical, but it helps you with one of my biggest mantras is delegation. You can never be successful as a leader in an organization if you don't learn how to delegate. And when you delegate, you have to be able to delegate, and then you have to be able to trust your people, knowing that in the end it's you're responsible for all of the decisions and everything that happens. So um,
yes,
there's a lot of HR things I've been involved in, it down to the littlest nitty gritty. And HR is easier to understand than like IT and some technical things.
mm.
Um, but it's just, again, it keeps things interesting. I worked for bigger companies very early in my career, and I found out that I got bored. I was working for a very short time. I worked for AT&T, and I said, with the job I do here, if I didn't know what a telephone was, I wouldn't know what business we were in,
Ah,
because I'm so far away from what we do. Um, and that's not right. That's not wrong for everybody. It's right for some people. Just
yep,
for me, the variety and being, some of it is when you work for a smaller to a mid-sized company, it's being at the table, it's being part of the decision-making team,
yep.
it's your opinions being valued, and really not just, what I've done my whole career is I don't just wear the CFO cap. I wear, I'm responsible and in charge of this business, and I really take ownership of what I do. So
Yeah, that's amazing feedback because I think having, experience in, very hierarchical structures as opposed to flat, smaller organizations gives you that perspective that, I think you need to have as a fractional CFO. And I think that's a really good junction into why you started Impact CFO. What was the catalyst for that?
yeah, so I talked a little bit about my career, and I had great fortune of in 2019 joining on a fantastic family-owned business in the U.S. So it was a global business, but it was headquartered here in Chicago area.
Yep.
So it was kind of like I'd finally gotten there. Family-owned. We were $200 million in sales. We made equipment very highly vertically integrated, 250,000 square feet of manufacturing. We made equipment that counted, scanned, processed coins and currency. So think about those scanners behind the tellers in the bank, things in casinos, all kinds of that, all
Yep.
kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So now I was a CFO responsible for the entire globe and this whole business. And things, as things always happen, the plan that we had laid out didn't happen, and we ended up selling that business. I had the good fortune of helping to sell that business at the end of 2019. So I went from being totally excited to help run this business for 5 to 10 years to now we sold the business.
Right.
And after that, I was almost immediately recruited to help sell another third generation family owned business in the Chicago area when I joined them in 21, which we sold them in 22. Um, After staying with that business for about a year and seeing the new ownership structure and finding out what they were all about, I decided that that wasn't. I didn't really want to work for um, that type of ownership structure for the next 5 to 10 years. So I did some soul searching, took some time off, and then said, "Hey, why don't I do this on my own? It gives me some really nice flexibility
Yep.
to be where we work from wherever you want. I visit my clients, I do all that, and it's really interesting because I focus primarily a lot of it. I focus on the family owned business and the transitions, whether those would be internally or externally. And I get to help. I mean, this might sound kind of silly because nobody does everything just for altruistic means, but I get to help a lot of different businesses and a lot of different families, right?
Yep.
There's some really, really staggering statistics. 1 in 8 1 in 3 businesses makes it to the second generation, and only 1 in 8 businesses makes it to the third generation. Um, the other thing is something like 50% of businesses, when their founder and or owner passes away, whether it's unexpected or anything, those businesses go bankrupt. So what I feel like I'm doing is I'm helping not only the owners but the families of the owners, and then all the employees and the families of the employees, because you need to have a plan, and it affects all the stakeholders in the business. So, um, and it's really rewarding work because you get to see a lot of variety of things. Um, and what I see, what I get in the end, I think, I'm really kind of expert in manufacturing and industrial things and all that. But in the end, most businesses are pretty much the same. I've helped out a not for profit, and in the end, it's really just the same. It's good management building blocks, understanding your numbers, and forecasting what needs to happen. So.
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you very much for the context. And you're absolutely right. Underneath the My Future Business logo, it's helpful people helping people. And that's what you're all about. And I really, really value that sort of approach. Now, tell me, for those who are uninitiated, what is a fractional CFO and how do they help businesses?
So, fractional CFO, the easiest way to look at it is, as you know, and most everybody knows, CFOs aren't a cheap commodity out there to get, a cheap person to hire. So what I do is, what fractional CFOs can do is you can purchase a portion of them. So there's all kinds of different ways to do it. Sometimes I have clients that I spend 20 hours a month with. Sometimes it's 5 hours a month. Sometimes it's more than that. And so you're getting that senior level strategic advice, but you're not paying the outrageous or the very high salary. So it's not an inexpensive thing, but you can get what you need. The way that I run my business is it's quite flexible. There's a lot of practitioners out there that have very rigid cookie cutter businesses, um, and say, well, you could only have this and you can only have that. I say, hey, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm available 24/7. I've got this cell phone and email and all that, and I really want to serve your business. So, it's a lot. In a lot of cases, it's businesses that really don't understand their numbers, and they really need to understand their numbers. Um, and you need to put processes in place that allow you to gather valuable historical information that you can run your business from a management perspective. But then more importantly is future looking. Once, I've worked for a lot of companies, and there's a lot of accounting and all that. And anytime that we've gotten our ball rolling and everything's really humming along and the going along, I probably spend 80 to 90% of my time on operational issues or forward looking things, not backward looking things. Once it's done, there's not much you can do about it. You've got to go forward. So
Absolutely. Great feedback once again. I'd like to know, you talked about your specialities. So what industries and I guess niches are you serving? Is still
yeah,
manufacturing?
so mostly manufacturing, but I have a kind of a subspecialty. So any manufacturing process I can do, and it's mostly B2B, but I've worked for 4 different businesses where we manufactured and or engineered equipment that we sold to other businesses and then maintained a robust after sale service. So let me give you an example. I mentioned the business that I worked for that was was a German owned business. We sold at that business. We sold scales and slicers primarily into the retail grocery sector, and then as well as food service and sandwich shops on the slicer side. So um, I've dealt with retail. I haven't sold retail products, but I've sold a lot of equipment that has gone into retail settings. So, for instance, a grocery store has hundreds or not hundreds, but dozens of scales and slicers at the deli counters and all that. So I've been in all kinds of huge clients, huge customers, the big grocery chains in the U.S.,
Yep.
Kroger, Albertsons, Safeway. We also did a lot of food service, and we supplied all of the slicers to 3 chains over here: um, uh, Jersey Mike's, Jimmy John's, and then Firehouse Subs. And recently, I take a little pride in it because we really did a lot of work on our food service sector when I was working with this company called Bizerba. They've just landed the biggest elephant in the bag, which is Subway. So they're
Oh,
supplying 32,000 slicers to Subway. It's really interesting because Subway used to slice their meat centrally, and now they're slicing it in each store
locally. Yep.
based on all their fresh stuff. And then in a business like that, then you sell some piece of equipment, but then you also have to maintain it. So, in the businesses I've been in those 4 businesses, somewhere between a quarter and a half of our business has been after sales activities, parts, maintenance, service, and all that kind of stuff. So you're really running 2 separate businesses.
Yep.
You're running manufacturing and distribution, and then you're running service where you have, I've had businesses that have had anywhere from 100 to 500 service techs across the country. That's what I really focus on. But what I'm working on now in my area, and I've started focusing on is, there's hundreds of what are called tool and die manufacturers and shops in the Chicago area, and the most of them are privately owned by an individual family. So I try to reach out to those types of people and help them out. So I'm really in those areas. And what I found is a lot of the businesses doing some of the services that I do, they say right off the bat, we want to stay away from anything that does manufacturing and has any inventory because it's messy. And I say, well, that's what I do, and that's what I've been doing for 30 plus years. I want to deal with that kind of stuff. I want to help you figure out how are you costing, where are you sourcing your products from correctly? How are we doing everything to maximize the margins that we can generate from our products? So
Yeah, wow. That's a very different take. And I think there's absolutely key takeaways for anybody who's watching this call today. Certainly stick around to the end because we're going to be sharing the links back to Lowell and all of the services if this is something that's of interest to you. Now, tell me, you touched on it earlier when, small organizations, their owners pass on. They often go broke and just go out of business and basically disappear. Makes me start to think about exit strategies. Can you help with that sort of thing?
that's exactly what my number one marketing technique is. I really so here's the optimal thing. Those of us that are getting advanced in age a little bit, I'm mid 50s. I'd love to get involved with a business when there's a 5 to 7 year window to plan for the exit. You'd be amazed when you go in and you meet an owner of a business, and you ask them what their transition plan or their strategy is, and they shrug their shoulders. They have no idea. Well, what would I do without my business? Well, what's happened, especially in the US, is owners identify so much with their business, they can't imagine it without them. The next thing I usually ask them is I say, what happens if you get hit by a bus? And, you usually say, usually you ask the question, what happens if you win the lottery? But I don't ask that because most of these people love their business so much that if they won the lottery, they would still stay with their business. So if you get hit by a bus, they say, well, I guess my business would end. So the first thing I say to them is, well, why don't you get some key man insurance so your family can hire somebody to run the business if everything goes through you. Um, and then it's okay. Do you want to plan this? Well, my kids will take it over. Well, I say, have you asked your kids? Well, no, not really. And a lot of times children don't want to go into the family business because they have other interests of their own that they're more interested in. And it's not easy to go into a family business. It's again, I ask all the owners that I try to work with and all the CEOs, I say, what are your personal goals and what are your business goals, right? And a lot of times they just look at me with a blank stare, and then we work through it and we say, well, what do you want to do? How do you want to go about it? The other part that can be really, really messy is when the ownership lines aren't clearly defined. I'm a big proponent of, if the business is owned by say the owner owns it and it's going to pass it to his children, you know, it, it, it's sometimes a lot more sound to sell it to the child that wants to be in the business, and then that the funds that come out of that become assets or of the estate, and then it's divided equally between the heirs of the estate. So it's easy to get all those things kind of cluttered up, and then you've got family issues. So there's a lot that goes into it, and my wife gets very mad at me because she actually is a licensed social worker with master's degrees and all that. And I say, when I go to work, I'm sort of a social worker or a therapist because you wouldn't believe the family situations you have to work through. And then my wife and my three daughters tell me that that's not possible, that I'm a therapist because I'm not emotional and I don't really listen to anybody. But that's a whole nother story that we could take a whole nother podcast for.
I reckon you're an emotional
So
character. It's just below the surface. I can feel it
yeah,
now.
so that's really the key is listening. And the other part is, and I've been talking a lot with, I call them in the US, they're now calling them wealth managers, right? Or
Yep.
people who do the financial to invest. So I go into a client and I say, listen, I don't I don't do investments. I have somebody who handles my investments. But most of these business owners aren't looking at their business as an asset. They say, I have investments, I have stocks, I have bonds, and this is my business, and this is kind of where I take my income from. But it is an asset. And if you don't take the time to put it in condition to transfer to another family member or to sell externally, then you're going to end up selling it for scrap. I can't tell you how many times I'd say to a business owner, what do you think your business is worth? And they say, well, it's got to be worth 5 million or 10 million. I said, well, when we sit down and look at your numbers and we get down to what your true EBITDA is, first of all, they say to me, what is EBITDA? So I have to explain that to them. And then I say, well, your EBITDA is basically zero. So we're going to end up selling this business for, your assets, your inventory, your buildings, your receivables, your fixed assets, and they can't believe it. But there's a lot of things you have to do and understand to put in place to market a business effectively. So
You know,
it takes a bit of time.
yeah, how do you meet somebody? How do you meet a new client where they are right now? Because you're coming in cold, basically. So you obviously have a focus on relationships. How does that all unfold for you?
Well, again, my business is still fairly new, so it's a lot of work. It's really interesting because when you work as a CFO for a long time, you work for companies, you do all that. It's an immense mind shift because all of a sudden now I'm a CEO of my own business. I'm a salesperson. I have to work on prospecting. I need to work on my sales techniques. I'm out networking at events, um, every day. I mean, today's Wednesday. It's the end of the day Wednesday. I've been at 3 events already this week. Um, and it's a lot of work. It's different work, and it's not for some people. What I bring differently is that I'm doing that work, and I want to serve the clients that I can get to. There's a lot of people who do it and just say, I'm going to do this part time, and if I meet somebody, I'll work with it. Or there's a lot of organizations that are, significantly large organizations that um, can market fractional CFO services. It's like anything in this world. You figure out very quickly what you know and what you don't know, and where to get the right assistance to help you with the things that you don't know. Again, you have to have an open mind. I'm not a kid, but I'm learning something every day, and it's really energizing. It's really motivating. It's really having me focus on a lot of the things that I was taking for granted, right?
Yep.
And again, it's really, in the end, it's, do you want to be of service? And nobody does anything really for. I mean, I know people who do something completely selfishly, but I'm running a business. I want to do it, but I want to help as many people as I can.
Absolutely. Yep. You've got to start at the start. Everybody crosses that first point where they say, look, this is right for me. And, you're doing the right thing, I believe, by getting onto podcasts. Because for me, as long as there's a need for communication between people and helpful people helping other people, I think you'll be good to go. Now, tell me, out of all of the things that we've spoken about, you've talked about industry sector being manufacturing. And there are lots of moving parts to what you do. But out of all of this, what's the one thing do you think that you do the best? What one skill set do you think is your key go-to?
So, on top of all of those things, what I and have always been the hallmark of my career is I have been the right hand person to the CEO or the person running the business. Um, Again, we talked about the CEO role being the loneliest role in the business. Um, the one after that is the CFO. So the CEO really needs support, because they can't. If you think about a business, and you've got a sales organization which has an agenda. You've got an operations group that has an agenda. Maybe you have a service group, you have manufacturing. They all have an agenda. Typically, the CFO, the HR, and the CEO don't have an agenda. They're interested in the best of all the business. So I like sitting next to the CEO and really giving the advice and support that needs to be done. Now, I sometimes have to give advice and opinions that aren't wanted or warranted. I have a client that I'm sitting down with all the time and saying, man, you've got some really tough decisions to handle here, and it affects family members and these things, but you're going to have to do them. Otherwise, your business is going to be in jeopardy. So, you can't sugarcoat things, but that's what's fun about it. That's, I've always said it's fun at being at the table, and I understand the business. I always talked about all the businesses I've been in, and I sold, I told you, scales and slicers, counting equipment. I've done
You
some
name
very,
it.
I'm sorry.
You name it. You've done it.
I've done a lot of technical things. And I said, I never understood how to be the engineer in it, but I understand the business process,
Mm-hmm.
and I can lend the advice in how you need to do it. The tough decisions that need to be made are the ones that people don't want to make, and you can't run away from making decisions. So that's what I help CEOs do. I can do all that other fancy stuff that we talked about, and I can market businesses, I can raise money, I can do all that. But really, in the end, it's being that confidant and that support to the business owner.
I see the operational aspects and, your need to be somewhat of a visionary contributor to an organization, regardless of size. But there's also the strategic hat. How do you know when you're switching from one to the other? Is it a boardroom conversation where you're specifically thinking strategically, or is that always in the back of your mind?
I mean, I think it's always there, and I think you have to be balancing all those things at the same time, right? So I have one client now that I was referring to that they're just in a very tough financial situation based on the what happened through the pandemic, and then with the supply chain issues. They're in a very much of a down year. So we're just fighting through tactical um, operational things to get back to profitability. But while those things are going on, I'm also reminding the CEO of, this is some of the things we need to do to help us for when this recovers and we're looking at it in 3 years. You can't shut one off or turn one on or off, right? Now, if there's a business and you're working with them and they just are focusing on, I want to get this business to, a certain level of profitability and then I want to sell it, then you focus on those operational things to get them there. But you're still thinking about the strategic piece of, how am I going to position this when I go to market? How am I going to position this with the business brokers we're going to work with, or the investment bankers? Or how are we thinking about what I bring is, because I've sold businesses, is how do the buyers think about it, right? It doesn't matter what you think about the business, it's what the buyers are going to think about it. So there's always a strategic piece going on. And again, I say this all the time. I'm not the dumbest guy that ever walked the earth, but I'm also not the smartest guy. I have all these fancy degrees. But what I'm really good at and what I do is, because I've been doing it for 35 years and I've spun around the sun a few times and really learned a lot of things and done it in a lot of different environments. So that's really,
That's it in a nutshell. I
you
love
can't.
to talk about people. I know you talked about not being, an emotional character, but when you're in this line of work and it's part time, there would be the need for an ongoing relationship of sorts. How important are relationships in business for you?
I mean, relationships are everything, right?
Mm.
You have to have, again, one of the things, and I have all these sayings, and people get tired of hearing them, is um, um, trust and respect isn't granted, it's earned, right? So you have to show people that you're trustworthy and that you're going to be there and that you can make tough decisions. People, leaders are made and they're at their best in a crisis situation. It's sort of easy to go along when everything's okay, but you really find out who is a leader and when the chips are down and when you have a really tough time. Um, so yeah, you gotta keep cranking along and just do the right things,
Do the
right? I
right
mean,
thing all the time. I did visit your website, but for those who haven't visited your website, there is a whole array of different sort of service components to what you do. I'm wondering
yeah,
if you could just give us a brief rundown on the different sort of elements that you provide, different services.
yeah. So I mean, it's as simple as helping with your monthly reporting. I have a lot of experience in ERPs. I have a lot of experience with helping to develop, grow, and change accounting departments and finance departments. They come in all different shapes. What do you need in your department? And we could build those out. Um, you know, um, Valuations. I work with valuations, and I can do a lot of that work. But at some point, you have to work with other other entities when you're really going to market things out.
Hmm.
In the end, and again, everything comes back to having good processes in your business, right?
Yeah.
So, valuations and all that. And one of the other specialties I have, and this is going very deep, is, I have a lot of experience with businesses that have long-term contract accounting, which is called percentage of completion accounting. And that is kind of it's not rocket science, but it's a niche knowledge. And when I was selling the business where we did that, I was probably the most knowledgeable on the differences between typical financial reporting for that versus the valuations. The investment bankers didn't necessarily know as much as some of us knew. Yeah, so those are the
That's the
basics.
breakdown. Yeah, love it. I wonder, are you able to provide this sort of services remotely as well? Is that an
Yeah,
option for people?
yeah. Most of the work I do is remote. I think that we still have, in the changing society we have, I think we still need to have some face to face.
Mm.
So my attitude on everything is very different than what it was, 5, 6 years ago. But most of the work I do is remote. I like, especially working with manufacturing and all that. I like to visit my clients and see them occasionally, especially in the beginning. Um, I think you have to look at what the manufacturing process is, what the business is, see the people. And I believe that looking people eye to eye is really of extreme value. So probably in the onboarding process in the beginning, I spend more time, but I work with clients all over the U.S. I even have dabbled in Canada. Um, so no, it's pretty much a virtual thing, and then with some travel involved.
I think about this. We touched on the helpful people helping people thing, and I wonder, how does it actually make you feel when you see your clients getting some results, getting some positive ROI for the work that you're doing for them?
I mean that's in the end, that's what it's all about, right? I mean, I really that's why I do what I do, because I can see the vision. If you think about a business, right? You think about, and if you go all the way back to one of the things we study in first year in business school is, Michael Porter's five forces and stakeholders, right?
Yep.
Think about all the stakeholders in a business. So when you can help a business to continue on and do well, you're helping vendors, you're helping customers, you're helping the owners, you're helping employees, you're helping people in that community that are counting on the tax incentives and structures and payments that go there. So, yeah, it's extremely rewarding. There's a lot of hard work in it, and then things don't always go the way you plan. But when you can really help a business, it's just a great feeling. It's
What
just
a,
a great feeling.
what a
So,
fascinating conversation that we've had, and I'm pretty sure that Impact CFO is going to make a great deal of difference to a lot of different businesses across the land. So I wish you all the very best. Now, when people want to connect with you and they want to work with
yep,
you, do you have some sort of an onboarding process? How do they connect with you? Tell us a little bit
yeah,
about that side.
yeah. So the easiest way is I have a website, a pretty well developed website, and it's called impactcfo.net. IMPACTCFO.net. Um, and when you go to my website, you'll see a lot of stuff about me. But there's right at the top, one of the tabs is contact. You can set up a complimentary call with me. Um, and we'll talk through whatever it is you need. There's another option on there that says free. And this right now, the free, what's called kind of the big offer is, it's a 7 item family owned business transition questionnaire.
Hmm.
And if you put your information in and fill it out, I will get that. And then my commitment is that within a few days, you'll get back from me a personalized video with some easy suggestions, and hopefully from there we can talk more about what we do. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can call me on my phone. It's 847-212-4081. Again, 847-212-4081. As well, you can email me directly. It's lowell@impactcfo.net. There's some interesting blogs that you can get access to on LinkedIn. Link with me on LinkedIn, as well as you can see the blogs that I post on my website, and I posted one this week that's really interesting to me, and I'm really proud of it. It's called "What Happens If You Get Hit by a Bus," which is what we were talking about.
I love
Um,
it. I love
it's,
it.
so I'm really happy to talk and visit with anybody at any point. So
That's great news. Thank you very much. Now, anybody who's looking for this type of assistance, you will be able to find all of the links back to Lowell, and impactcfo.net will be just a click away from you. No matter where you see the call, you're going to get access to those links. So definitely reach out. I know that this service is going to make a difference for your business. Don't go it alone. Again, that's impactcfo.net. Below this post, you're going to find that link. And Lowell, this has been an amazing touch on your fascinating field of fractional CFO work. Thank you so very much for joining me on the show today.
thank you very much. Have a great day.